Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Rivera. I'm the Community Engagement Editor for the Long Beach Post. I was invited today to moderate a panel on the election by the folks here at the compound, a new art space here in the Zaffaria district, and where we are today. And my guest today is Vanndearlyn Vong and Bodek Luna. Thank you for joining me, guys. And then I'll go ahead and introduce you. Vanndearlyn Vong is a Long Beach native educated in the city's public school system. Now she's a President's Scholar at Cal State Long Beach, where she is studying political science and Khmer, but she has taken a break this semester so she can work as a field coordinator for a local race that may see its first Cambodian woman elected to the city council. She began working on campaigns in 2018, including for candidates on the city council, school board, assembly, and state senate. In 2019, Vanndearlyn became an elected delegate to the state Democratic Party after earning the most votes by registered Democrats in her assembly district. She says her involvement in the community is driven by her yearning to foster meaningful change. Thank you, Vanndearlyn, for being here.
Thank you.
Bodek Luna is a Manila-born painter and muralist based in Long Beach. His work explores nostalgia, social justice, and empowerment through his use of saturated portraiture existing in postmodern landscapes adorned with tropical iconography. Did I say that right? It's the hardest word. His community organizing efforts include Philippine U.S. Solidarity Organization and as a volunteer at the Filipino Migrant Center here in Long Beach. He has curated group art exhibits within the city and was the art director for the Long Beach Filipino Festival. From commercial commissions to album covers, he aims to bind the community by showcasing local talent and businesses to promote a self-sustaining cultural city. Bodek, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So we're talking about the election today, and there's a lot of stuff going on. There's the presidential, there's state ballots, local races, but none of that would make an election if we don't have people voting in them, right? So my first question to both of you is, how do you convince people that their vote matters? And we'll start with you, Vanndearlyn.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person and where their interest is at. For example, I remember door knocking back in the primary, and it was an elder auntie who had never voted before and, wasn't familiar with local elections or anything. And so, I shared with her about the history of voting and how this is something that people have had to fight for. Mm-hmm. And, before Americans, their vote wasn't even one vote. It was 3/5 of a vote. And so, I shared with her how amazing this opportunity is that we have to elect someone who will create change. And so that was how I got to her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so definitely more of the historical, side of it, of just really the importance of that. Okay. How about you, Bodek?
I think voting is very important, and it's even more important now for the youth to be involved. I remember being a youth here. I was not a citizen yet, so I didn't have the proper tools to be able to participate. But I was educating myself a lot. I was new to this country, and other than the knowledge I have prior to coming here, just doing field research, through people that I meet. And also, I think that if you don't vote, it's kind of a disservice to, like Vanndearlyn said, the people who fought for the right to vote, like women's suffrage, they were like the very first, like, Pussy Riot type, characters that are disrupting the voting suppression, equal rights movement, and, like Vietnam War era, like if you could be drafted, you should be able to vote. So I highly encourage it. And if you think about it, like, we are putting the people in power that's going to affect the political landscape locally and also internationally. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very important.
And then I would also add to that I know it doesn't feel like with the presidential, there is much power in some of the states that aren't the swing states, but even locally, I know like a lot of the decisions are by mere, a couple of numbers, a couple of ballots in that sense. And I know you're focusing on a local race too, where it very well could be decided that way too. I'm curious to know if you've ever, as you're campaigning right now and helping for that local candidate, do you get those kind of questions, like where you're telling them, oh, go vote, and people are like, dismissive about it?
Not really. There have been a couple, but for the most part, they're excited. The people that we do connect with, yeah.
And I know you both touched a little bit about just family. I kind of want to go into those the elders, the immigrant populations who maybe are, been here a long time, maybe became U.S. citizens, but still weren't active voters. I'm curious to know how you've engaged your family members who kind of fit in that criteria, Bodek.
Well, being in the community organizing scene, most of the people that we interact with are not really politicized. So in a way, when migrants move here, they don't really feel like they're represented, even though the policies revolve around their lifestyles. Because what's lacking is the language of education and also establishing a political identity. Because for most migrants, they're just so focused on catching up, like building a foundation into just being here, and they're starting over from scratch. So I think that if you were going to engage with them in a political discussion, like my org has this thing called social identity class analysis. So you kind of research kind of like, oh, where are you from? Like when did you move here? Like, are you conservative type of thing? So when it comes to like arguments, like I think that basically like everyone is a potential voter and ally just waiting to get educated. So that's how I see it.
Do you feel like once you kind of invest and really, make an effort to outreach and educate them, then they're more likely to become voters that way? Like they just need someone to focus, and give them that attention.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that youth that are probably like more versed in that should also, participate not only individually, but on like a circle level, like get your friends involved, like educate your aunts and uncles, your parents, become part of the conversation.
Yeah. What about you, Vanndearlyn?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what you said about the piece on education and getting folks politicized. I think it has to come, especially with your own family, it needs to come from a place of love, and you need to have patience, because what I have experienced with some folks in the older generation is that like they are focused on surviving, but sometimes they just don't want to listen to you because you're younger than them. And so just educating them, like with my family, it started very slowly. Like, what are you doing? I'm working on a campaign. And why are you knocking on our neighbors' doors? Oh, well, I want them to vote. And so it's just the steady, I think, like process of getting folks and like calling them into the process and having them engaged.
And I remember you kind of speaking before this with your parents that it really, and I found that interesting too. It came from the younger generation, showing them like, hey, look, yes, it's about the American dream, making it in America, but you can do so much more with this. And by you acting and doing this, engagement, you're showing them that they can do it too.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, and the reason that they do end up voting is because they see, this is one way we can maybe build power or at least make ourselves heard in this process.
And I mean, you see the efforts now. We may have our first Cambodian woman elected to the council, and I know that's been a lot of years in the making with, the Cambodian power, just kind of realizing their power that they have too. Yeah. Moving into, those of us who are, civically engaged, we're oftentimes the ones that are, helping others in the decision-making process when it comes to voting. So I wanted to ask you guys, how do you decide on candidates and issues that you may not be intimately aware of, but, you're helping others along that way because you're kind of that point person in that sense?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How do you help folks, like maybe if you don't know a specific candidate or a specific issue, but folks are going to you because they know you're that person that's engaged, like how do you help in that sense?
Gotcha. So I think the very first advice I give myself is only speak on things you're fully aware of. Don't just say, I heard this, I heard that. You could just always say, I'll circle back with you. I'll check with people that I'm in alignment with through an organization. That's why I can't stress it enough. If you join an organization that aligns with your values and basically like in touch with the community, that's like a resource that's stronger than the internet. And there's accountability within like your kasamas, like your comrades, people that are actually lobbying and things like that. So I think it's my number one suggestion is to join an organization. It's like a mountain of resources that you can't just find online, filled with like misinformation and all that stuff.
One thing that off screen you were letting me know before that I found really interesting, that you said that you tell your parents once they get mailers to throw it away. That for you, like, I'd like for you to speak on that. Just kind of
So I think when talking about politics with my parents, because we're coming from the Philippines, you know, where it's basically like imperialized by America to this day. You know, our tax dollars are going into, you know, investing infrastructures like in the Philippines. Like my mom told me that her old elementary school is now an American mining town. So it's kind of crazy if you think about it. And then, you know, I just tell her like our president's killing our people and who's backing him, US and China fighting for political influence into what's going to happen in the islands, you know, so it's kind of like a Puerto Rico type of deal.
Yeah.
So once I told her that, then she told my dad, you know, it's like persistence is key to educating the hard-headed, I think.
That's a good rule there. I know for me, just, you know, we have resources. I know we have our sample ballot. We have a lot of voter guides too, but I think that's a good point too, with just organizations or those that you can trust, and then just people yourselves. So you know, that trusted messenger is always going to be a big one, right? This one personally for me as a journalist, I'm always curious to hear from outsiders, you know, their perspective. In an age when newsrooms are shrinking, because that is a reality going on right now, what is most important about elections that you think journalists should cover, and how?
Yes, constitutionality and integrity. I know folks have been, and I'm glad they're sharing about the fake ballot boxes that the Republican Party has been putting. And, you know, when it comes to just candidates themselves, integrity really matters. And, you know, who is paying for their stuff, and, you know, who does support them. So definitely just constitutionality and integrity, that newsrooms.
And you talking about, like, you know, behind kind of like the money, following the money. I feel like back then we were told, like, you know, people don't really care about that stuff, but I do feel like there is a shift and people want to know those nitty gritty details, right?
Yeah, I've never seen like Long Beach so politically awake. Some of it, I mean, it's a lot of drama depending on which council race, but at least people are engaged.
Yeah, I'm like, that's not a bad thing there. What about you, Bodeck?
I want to add, like, because the question was kind of centered around what should they cover more, you know, especially during these times. I think there's enough noise in the news about what's going on in the office and the election and all that stuff, but I think that there should also be a focus on grassroots movement of like the pockets of communities of people fighting for, you know, like representation and being heard. And, you know, with like movements like that, it's like the people for the people type of thing, you know. I would love to see more organizations and publications, you know, especially that who are you reporting for anyways, you know. So I think that would be nice to see, because we're bombarded with like these propaganda from like big news companies, you know, like, and so then that would be nice to see.
And then the focus, kind of going back what you're saying, it's, you know, for the people, but it's the focus on like bigger issues that bring in the clickbaits almost, you know, but nothing of, you know, the small little details or ballot issues or anything like that. I'm curious to know with that, you know, do you feel like, is there still space for like, you know, long form writing, or, you know, does everything we have to kind of think of readers as not having that much time, they want to know, but we got to give it in a concise manner? Do you feel like the way people, like, they're just like too bombarded with all of this information?
Gosh, that's so hard. Yeah. I don't think it's on the media. Well, of course it should be readable, but I don't think it's on the media to like condense or shorten articles. I think for us as people right now, we need to be really intentional with how we're using our phones. Because like even just being on my social media, I feel like it's a constant ad. So yeah, as long as the news is, you know, factual, and yeah.
That's important, yeah. What about you? What do you think about?
As far as content, I think,
especially from an artist, from a visual perspective.
That's the only language I know, visual. But I think there's some articles there that I guess like the tone of the writer could be misleading, you know, so you really have to be. But I think I've seen articles where it's like a long one, super intricate, and then there's like a kind of like a infograph of what key points they're doing, and I really appreciate that because that's something that I could just easily share to someone who's not a reader, you know.
Okay, so
Easily
something-
digestible.
Okay.
Well, it's
so-
like two versions, you know. So if you have time later when you come home, now you could read the whole thing. So
It's like too long, didn't read. Right there.
Got it. That's a good. That's a good balance to find on that, right? And then I'm curious to know too. Just you know, do you think it's more of going through social media too? Do you think it's like the way you consume is now just really social media? Like that's how you kind of find your articles too?
Yeah, I will say for myself, like my Instagram feed after the murder of Mr. Floyd, it just kind of exploded with like resources for protesters and delved into the issues. So I think, yeah, it's become a way that people are finding their news.
Yeah.
And then with that comes the misinformation piece as well that Bodeck mentioned.
Yeah. And that's where trusted messengers come in.
exactly.
So moving on to the presidential race specifically, I know Californians don't feel like they have, you know, a say in this. We're not a swing state, we're a blue state. So we don't really feel like our vote may matter in that sense, you know. But the discussion around the topic is, you know, it can be controversial at times, you know, it can even complicate relationships. I'm curious to know how you've handled those kind of encounters, whether in person, online, like just to have those healthy discussions. Like, can we even still have that, you know? Like, can we debate that or, you know, be informed? What do you think, Bodeck?
Well, it depends on what platform. If it's online, then just good luck. You know, there's no talking to that person with like a meme as their profile picture. So I think in person is good, or like if you're just in your immediate circles, like I mentioned, you know, like you just have to meet them eye to eye to see where they're at and make sure that it's civil. Like I said earlier, you know, everyone's an ally just waiting to get educated. You know, we're trying to decolonize everything that we've been taught at schools or, you know, news, like culture, like basically just like rethinking culture. How are we gonna build a new culture for the people, you know?
I'm curious to know, have you ever had, like, personally, has that ever happened where you've encountered someone who didn't maybe align with you, you know, and how you've handled, like, was there peace on the other side of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you just gotta choose your battles and when to stop, because if you push someone over the edge, then you'll just be considered a threat and they won't talk to you ever again. So it's better to kind of just like lay it off and then like later check in with them and see how you could, you know, because like sometimes like new information could be so shocking to someone that you have to pull away and let them marinate on that or do whatever they want with that information, because I've been told things that I did not believe in, but then again, now I know where you're coming from. I could look into why you believe that, and then later on when we have a discussion again, I could debunk those things for you.
Good point. What about you, Vanndearlyn?
I've definitely gotten into a virtual argument with someone. Well, it wasn't an argument. I was honest with them, but that person was like, you know, I don't feel like my vote counts and all these things. And the argument I made to them was that, you know, you're really doing a disservice for everyone who can't vote and for our Black and brown brothers and sisters who need us to make our voices heard. And then I was like really passionate, so I was like, okay, you know, I'm really upset right now. I'm just gonna like not talk to you. And I was like, I don't need to beg you to vote. I mean, it's your right, but that's your choice. If you're just like, fine. If you were given the opportunity to make yourself heard and you don't take it, then that's on you. But since then, I've learned, you know, to not
Lay yourself out on the online.
and yeah.
What about in person? Have you ever had those kind of discussions face to face with anyone?
I have, and it's hard because someone I spoke to was my aunt, and she was like, you know, they never do anything for us, they'll never care about us, and all of these things. But I remind her, have you participated before? And I think that is the beginning where we can get folks plugged in, like Bodeck mentioned. You mentioned earlier about like getting people to volunteer, and then now they can join your org. So getting them more engaged.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of just showing them the path in that sense, right? Okay. Continue with the presidential race. The policies pushed by either candidate have real life consequences. So, whether we're swing state or not, their decisions are going to affect us, right? What policies are you keeping an eye on that, depending on which candidate wins? We got with Trump, there's the ongoing threat with DACA, being revoked. With Biden, I know he hasn't committed to the Green New Deal. So what for you guys is something that you're kind of keeping an eye on and seeing how it goes?
Yeah, I'm regardless of who wins, but hoping it's Mr. Biden. I'm really looking, really interested about how they'll respond to COVID and the strategy behind that, because we haven't had a national response, a real one to it, besides ignoring it. And also with healthcare, I know Biden's talked about expanding the Affordable Care Act, so really curious to see what that will look like, because we really need healthcare.
I'm curious to know, within your network and your community, how has COVID impacted those folks with you?
It's been rough. People are just looking to survive, and then on top of that, we have a high rate of unemployment, and so. But out of that, I've seen the beauty of community coming together and mutual aid taking place in our city. So like with the food drives, we'll try to get folks to pick up the food and then deliver it to people who need it, and things like that.
What about you, Bodek?
I had some infographic stuff that I wrote down since I got the question. I don't want to miss anything. So going back to that question, if you think about like lack of funds to promote wellness during pandemic, think about like the military spending that we're constantly pumping out for more weapons to imperialize other countries. Like, why do we need to keep making weapons when we have so many already? Is that like a product that we're selling constantly? And then if you think about like investing military funding into education, public housing, healthcare, and also like the expansion of the border and immigration. If you think about like is that the kind of president that you want to support? Especially for conservatives, claiming like, what would Jesus do? Like, that's not what Jesus would do at all. It's just kind of crazy to me, because I came from like a Christian background, Catholic, being Filipino. So I think that now's the time to look into a pro-science, pro-people type of candidate, not only presidential, but also on the local level, people that are grounded where the people they're representing are, It's kind of enraging to think about that stuff.
And for you, having that background, you're with Philippines being in your homeland, and just you see the effect on the other side, right?
Oh,
you
definitely.
see the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, what was it? I think we're still funding Duterte's government to terrorize its own people, get rid of indigenous folks outside of the island so they could sell the land, like with minerals to foreign investors, and a lot of that's coming from the US, our tax dollars, So right now we've been doing like a lot of campaigns to pass into legislature this thing called the Philippine Human Rights Act, because there has been 30,000 deaths since this president has, not just Trump, but Duterte in the Philippines. It's been happening. And he's actually attacking activists and journalists and human rights defenders.
So it feels like, and I think this could be something where, where Americans could be in our own bubble, that we don't see the kind of the consequences and how widespread it is. And I know even with Cambodians and, the deportations that are taking place too.
This country invaded Southeast Asia, took no responsibility for it, left, and then now our parents who are immigrants and refugees come here to these disinvested communities, And like you keep bringing up American imperialism, it's very much well and alive today. And that is also connected to ICE and the deportations of our people, not to mention they're doing forced hysterectomies on our women, you know, and there have been calls to free them all, and I'm 100% behind those because, I mean, people don't belong in cages, they belong at home and safe with their communities, especially if they've already served time.
I'm curious to know, whichever president we end up with, a lot of this can be beyond a president's decision, right? Do you feel like there is power? We've seen a lot of protests. I wonder if you guys think like there's still power in protests, kind of, awakening, letting them know where the decision can really come from, with the
Totally,
people.
yeah. On, I think it was May 31st was our protest in Long Beach, and thousands came out to the streets, and that was my very first protest. I was scared, so we brought milk in case we got tear gassed. But I have never felt so much more love from strangers than in a protest. People brought water, masks, sanitizer, snacks, all for these strangers who believe that Black Lives Matter. And so, and connected to that is people have been bringing up, voting's not the only answer, and that's absolutely right. It takes voting, it takes protests, it takes working with nonprofits, it takes lobbying the legislature, like any way we can make an impact.
What about you, Bodek?
I think we also need to, since the topic is about voting, I just want to shift the focus on picking anti-racist, pro-immigrant candidates that would better represent the people and basically work on policies that are actually going to be effective and would be conducive for change, for real change, not like a band-aid on the gashing wound type of thing. And also to add to that, circle back to hysterectomies, this is nothing new. ICE is not the first thing that's being done to. There's been cultural genocide with like the natives and like black and brown in prison. It's been happening for a long time. So when we talk about like policies, these are also things that we need to look into.
And I will add that even my own mom would tell me, we came from poor working class family, and she would let me know, this is in LA, that they would, were forcing her to take birth controls and do, all of this stuff, that they were targeting specific people too. So very much true that it's not new. It's just maybe in the age of social media we're hearing more about it, right? Moving on to ballot measures, and this is for whoever has been focusing on this. There's a lot of ballot measures in this election. I have not voted yet. I'm looking through. There's, I don't know, at least a dozen or so. One locally too. I'm curious to know, and I think one of them's like restoring voting rights for formerly imprisoned folks, and also 17-year-olds who, if they turn 18 in the general election, they get a vote too. So a lot of voting issues as well. I'm curious to know, what are you keeping a close eye on?
I care a lot about Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. I heard about it during my summer course and like did a whole training on it. So really looking out for that one because it's for the people. It's to tax folks like Disneyland to make sure they pay their fair share of taxes, and that will go back straight to our schools and communities. I think Prop 18 is the one you mentioned about allowing minors to vote in the general, and I am also following No on 22. It's because 22 is funded by like Lyft and Uber.
We're
trying to
get
so
and then they release those campaigns that are pretending that it's good for individual drivers when it's really not, and they use BIPOC actors to do it too, which is sad.
That's interesting seeing that. I saw a little bit of that on streaming services too, but even hearing that they pop up on our apps. I mean, it's their own apps, so they have that kind of, they're
influence,
able to, they have that influence on that too. But that's an interesting, it's all perception, and you have to kind of retrain yourself to look through that and not, be easily swayed in that sense too, right?
yeah.
And I think you were mentioning this before, Vanndearlyn, with the prop that could allow 18-year-olds, who are 17 in primaries. That could have been you if you had that chance, right? With the previous election, or which one?
Yeah. So this is my first election, and I was like 3 weeks away from being old enough to vote. And so, yeah, if that had passed in my time, I would have been able to vote for Hillary, maybe.
Do you feel? I'm curious to know if you feel like, some folks don't feel that, the age should be lowered. I know it was 21, decades back, now 18. Do you feel like, the youth now is way more prepared to be able to make those informed decisions? What do you think?
Oh, definitely, because back then you only have television with 4 or 5 channels. Now we have social media with all these information. But yeah, I really think that they're well equipped, but there's also kind of like a loophole on how social media companies are using their platform as propaganda to dissuade new voters, for example, I think it's in Myanmar, Facebook was responsible for Islamophobia that caused Muslim genocide, that there are so many refugees leaving that country. But yeah, definitely, because as a high school student, your only source of information is what's being taught in class or whatever documentaries you would see. But now we have YouTube, where you could watch mini docs, and social media with credible grassroots organizations that you could follow and look into. It's you really see the impact of policies that they're trying to pass, and then what can you do to change that.
Do you feel, I'm curious, you brought up some point about digital literacy, and do you feel like the youth can also know, when they're being swayed, and they can kind of read past that BS type of thing? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. When you mentioned about being more careful in the digital space, yeah, I think, the young folks, you said it earlier, they're our future. Everyone says they're our future, so why shouldn't we place our trust in them to vote?
That includes you. You're the youngest one. So, and I'm curious to see, what, and that kind of brings up in the college space. I know we're virtual right now, but there's definitely a lot of engagement in that, right?
With voting?
Yeah, and just, being active and...
Yeah, I've seen folks who were before just oh, I don't care about politics, and now they're reading up on issues and posting and informing others. So, yeah.
Okay. We went through these fast. Last question for both of you. What has your experience been like this election season with the work you do? We have the pandemic, we've got the uprisings that are, folks looking for accountability from our elected leaders, our police officers. What has that been like for you navigating that?
Well, I don't have a 9-to-5, so I wouldn't say I was super affected by loss of job. I'm constantly looking for jobs, so I think I used that time to not do any commercial work and be really mindful of who I'm collaborating with. And also, I saw on social media some artists are trying to pivot into donating artwork or selling artwork to fund, donations. For me, I feel like that was a time to step back, because I saw that as kind of a self-promotion in a way, and I don't want it to be misconstrued that I'm trying to, market my work through the movement. So the way I went about that was actually make propaganda art for the movement, with my org, flyers, creating banners or posters you could hand out to people at protests. So that's what I was doing during the uprising and during the pandemic riots, so yeah, making flyers and infographics for orgs, stuff like that, flyers for the Filipino Migrant Center. They were doing a lot of community outreach, bayanihan, they're getting donated food and groceries from mostly Bebot, which is a community kitchen, and I would deliver them to people on the list that they have to donate to.
Was there a big need in that? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I drove basically like every weekend to do it, to drop off food, and also phone banking with the census, to make sure, hey, are you signed up for the census? Blah blah. Oh, by the way, like, are you Filipino? Because if you are, you could join our org or a newsletter. So there's so many ways to get involved, like as an artist during that time. So.
How about you, Vanndearlyn?
Yeah. How COVID has affected my work?
Yeah, or just like how the election season has been. I know, especially you with the local campaign that started since late last year, I think, right?
Yeah.
So you saw both the in-person switch to virtual with the pandemic, and I'm not sure if everything else with the protests have changed everything. But how has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a matter of honing in on our ability to adapt. So we've shifted virtual, and I don't like it as much, to be honest. Like, I'm an introvert, but I really miss just seeing community, and it's something else when you knock on someone's door and you register them to vote, or maybe they weren't planning on voting and you made that difference. So it's been hard because I'm missing that. But despite that, we've been able to come through and still focus on what we need to do. Just working around our reality, I guess.
Someone had pointed this out in a different conversation, just like we're lucky that this happened at a time where for the most part we're pretty connected.
Yeah.
So if not, how much of that, you guys are working from your respective homes, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of, how with that, just your phone for your laptop, and then just, right? I'm assuming that's everything you have.
Yeah, and I actually made literal mobile calls from a car because we were phone banking virtually from the car, and we had to help a neighbor pick up a fridge because they needed a new fridge and couldn't afford one. So yeah, just that adaptability.
Is there anything else I'm missing that you guys wanted to bring up?
Oh, do you have any?
If not, then just final words from.
Mine's kind of long.
No,
that's okay.
Prepared statement. I appreciate.
Excuse me. So, so my org is called the Philippine U.S. Solidarity Organization, and it's an intersectional organization that focuses on other people's struggles as well. Like our main goal is to highlight human rights violations in any aspect of the community and also internationally. So we are currently campaigning for the Philippine Human Rights Act. This is a bill that will suspend U.S. security assistance to the Philippines until human rights violations by Philippine security forces cease and responsible state forces are held accountable, especially during the pandemic. So we have groups that represent us, like we're under the umbrella of iChirp. You could all find it in my link. So it's called the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines and Malaya movement. So basically we have a bill that was introduced by Susan Wild in Congress, and we have 19 out of 20 legislators backing the bill. 10 is needed from Foreign Affairs, and 1 must be from a Republican party. So we need this to happen by December, which is very soon. Alan Lowenthal, shout out, is up for re-election in Congress, who's in support of the PHRA, and there are also many organizations that are working endlessly, locally, nationally, and internationally on this campaign. So yeah, last April, Malaya movement, which is another group, actually went to DC, and they began lobbying for this campaign. So yeah, I just want to bring it up there, and if we do have, like, my org is like an intersectional org, like non-Filipinos can join too, so don't be scared if you want to join it. You're not drowning out Filipino voices. This is like the all-inclusive one.
And this is a local organization as well?
Yeah, from Long Beach, basically like South Bay. There's like a ton of chapters in the world, like of these organizations.
All right,
So, yeah, and we're actually working with Sanctuary LB, with
Coalition,
ICE,
yeah.
with the Community Defense Network, and also what was I gonna say? Let me look through here. Sanctuary LB and actually Black Lives Matter Long Beach is working with our organization on how to better organize, because it's kind of a fairly new organization. So yeah, I just love the, like, during the uprise, like all the intersections, like crossing paths happening, you know, like from like from the Philippines, you know, from Palestine to the Philippines, stop the US war machine. It's like
one of the slogans or the chants that there's a lot of catchy ones going.
It's really good.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. What about you, Vanndearlyn?
Yeah, reminder for everyone watching, please do your census today if you haven't already. It's the last day to do it. We need to make sure we get counted so that we have resources for our schools, our communities, and you can do it online. It's all confidential. You can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, just at my name, Vanndearlyn. And it would be great if you could also follow the Long Beach Southeast Asian Anti-Deportation Collective. We just started it recently, but we were able to bring Rot My Thong home. So he's out of ICE detention now, and we're working on getting his pardon. Yeah.
And you brought up a social media handle. Did you want to give any social media handles as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess I go by at Bodek Luna. And then if there's any orgs that you want to check out that I'm in alignment with, you know, definitely Puso, PUSO.SoCal. And Malaya Movement, iChirp US, ICHRP, and BLM LBC, Sanctuary LB. And yeah, I'm sure if you follow one of those, you'll find everything else. And Anak Bayan, which is like the youth. Like if you search on Instagram, Anak Bayan, you'll see a ton of chapters all over the world. It's crazy.
So a lot to choose from. And then I'll remind everyone that we are voting. Well, you can vote ahead of time, obviously vote by mail, but we have the general election November 3rd, so remember to do that. And then I just want to thank you guys for joining me, Vanndearlyn, Bodeck. Thanks for having me here, and to our host here at Compound and its beautiful spaces. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.